Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. The show is My Strategy, and we're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. We're very happy to be here with you today and really glad that you could join us. My Strategy episodes are live and on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Today we're going to be talking about learning to say no. In this episode, I'm going to talk about natural-born achievers and their tendency to say yes, which can get them overwhelmed. And learning to say no gives you back time, control, self-confidence, and much more. Well, happy to be here. Saturday is a great day of the week to reflect, but keep in mind that any day is a great day for you to reflect on your strategy. The My Strategy Show is growing. It's available on iHeart, iTunes, Player FM, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spreaker, and many more. So if you did miss this show or would like to hear a past episode, you can find them there. Also, we're available on most social media platforms. My Twitter handle is @HawkinsJohn. That's @HawkinsJohn, so follow me there. Or you can go to my website at johnmhawkins.com. And just like anything in life, we need to have a strategy and a plan to help us reach our goals because the best laid plans don't always work. This week, I'm looking for stories on situations where you might have been in a situation and had to say yes when you really meant no. Send me your story or just say hi. Send it to talk@johnmhawkins.com. And if you send in an email, you'll be entered into the weekly giveaway. Today, we're going to be talking about learning to say no. We're going to talk a little bit about how to tell when you are being taken advantage of. Learn a little bit about why you should say no more often. There's a lot of decisions that come into play. Also want to talk about why people can't say no and the power of saying no. Saying no is hard to do. Still, many have trouble saying no, so we're going to talk a little bit about some tips if you're overbooked and stressed. But it's a good opportunity. Maybe I should take it. We're going to then talk about ways to say no to anyone. Like using the word no, be firm but polite, be assertive, and more. So signs you are being taken advantage of. Have you ever felt like you were being taken advantage of? Constantly being asked. They know you're going to say yes. Got an article here by Lindsay Tiger. It says, especially when you're a natural-born achiever, going above and beyond at the workplace is second nature to you. Not only because you want to impress your manager, but you have high standards for yourself and your performance. While this is a positive trait to have, those who are incredibly self-motivated run the risk of being taken advantage of. Those who aren't as hardworking or enthusiastic can prey on you, since they know you'll deliver whatever project, deadline, or presentation is put in front of you. Branding and career experts Wendy Weiner says challenges those who may feel undervalued to speak up. Stand up for yourself. Show empowerment and self-respect. If someone is continually taking advantage of you, then they aren't showing you the respect that is due and owed. Then you become a doormat to the person, and their expectation is that they can always walk all over you. So what are some of these signs? She says you never feel good enough. After weeks of working diligently on a new launch for your company, the big day comes. Everything goes well, but even though you gave it your all, exceeded expectations, your boss fails to acknowledge your work and only has negative feedback. This can impact your self-confidence. It says it's human nature to crave validation, so withholding verbal praise is an easy way to control someone, she says. The same holds true if your efforts are always being nitpicked. Living in a state of criticism increases anxiety and stressful responses. Think about your daily interactions with people. How do they respond to you? Are they positive, optimistic, encouraging? Or are they nitpicking and pessimistic, driving anxiety and stress? Another one, she says, is you are always helping others. Someone needs help editing an email, you're there. Another person needs to pick up the slack where someone else left off. You got it. Thought this was helpful mentality is appreciated, or though this helpful mentality is appreciated, it's easy for many to take advantage of the people pleasers. Another one is your boss never takes responsibility or takes all of it. When a client meeting bombs and you're left with the burden of the fail, Or when it goes swimmingly, is your name somehow left off of the big company-wide announcement email? When your manager refuses to take responsibility for the bad stuff, but always steps up for the praise, he says you're in unhealthy grounds. These are pretty obvious signs here. You might not think it's a big deal. You were supporting role, helping out, making sure that the team was successful. You don't need the credit. But I think that all of that over time can weigh on you and can damage your self-esteem, your self-respect, and lead people to take advantage of you. Another one here is you are doing more work than you are paid for. No matter what the industry, everyone is short-staffed sometimes. Whether because validation of a slew of folks jumping ship for new opportunities, being understanding of the company's needs, you might step up and take on extra work. Though that is welcomed short-term solution, it isn't one that should be insistent. If you're not getting a salary increase, title change, your boss doesn't acknowledge your new additional responsibilities, then odds are you are being taken advantage of. Another one, are you always saying, I'm sorry? Well, if you're always apologizing, then those two words are far too often in the frequent vocabulary of most professionals. I'm sorry. And 99% of the time, we have no reason to apologize. You're merely showing how antsy or on edge you feel with your manager. As an experiment, keep a record of how many times you slip these words daily. You'll probably be surprised by the number. The next one is your ideas are never taken seriously. You spend countless hours brainstorming ideas and take your time to provide thoughtful, thorough suggestions when your manager requests them. But nothing is taken seriously. This can be a big downer on your opinion, on your work, and contribution to the team. As Craig says, a clear indicator that your boss is taking advantage of you. So those are some things to look out for in the workplace, but also at home, with friends, and anywhere you are in a group setting. And I think, it's important for us to start to think about how we are being treated, because how we're being treated can have lasting impact on us and can damage our self-esteem. And with a damaged self-esteem, it becomes very difficult to go out and proactively set goals. It becomes hard to feel that you are worthy enough to think or try to attain those goals. And as a result of that, it can just be a downward spiral. So I think next time you're having a conversation with someone, whether it's a friend, coworker, boss, peer, think about this. What are some of the signs that you're seeing? Are you being taken advantage of it and perhaps you don't know it? Are you saying you're sorry too often when you really have no reason to be sorry? Are you someone who likes to help? Are you someone where your boss is taking credit for everything that is happening? These are some serious things to be thinking about as we start to think about our own personal situations. And I think as we start to think about the prime goal of the show, which is personal development, it's important for us to assess these situations and know exactly how we are being treated, because sometimes the perception is the reality and other times it's not. And that's where it is important for us to start to listen to how we are being treated. And by getting more and more information and having conversations with our peers, writing down and documenting these is another great way to do it. If you were sitting there and heard all those different suggestions as to whether or not you're being taken advantage of, and then you started to write them down and document them, it's going to give you a clearer picture of what really is happening. Many times I think we do make statements out of habit, or we say yes out of habit. We think we're being helpful. But what are we giving up by saying yes to a certain ask? Well, there's an opportunity cost involved with that ask. And as a result of that, it can impact other work that we're doing. So all of these things are interconnected very closely. And when you think about it that way, is it worth the risk of not doing something? You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about why you should say no more often. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. You're listening to My Strategy, and we're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. I'm very happy to be here with you today. I'm glad you could join us. Right before the break, we were talking about signs that you're being taken advantage of. And this happens to lots of natural-born achievers. In this segment, I want to talk a little bit about why you should say no more often. There's actually some factors that we want to discuss here. Got an article by Kristen Wong. She says, why you should learn to say no more often. She says, humans are social animals who thrive on reciprocity. It's our nature to be socially obliging. And the word no feels like a confrontation that threatens a potential bond. But when we dole out an easy yes instead of a difficult no, we tend to overcommit our time, energy, and finances. The ability to communicate no really reflects that you are in the driver's seat of your life, said Vanessa M. Patrick, an associate professor of marketing at the C.T. Bauer College of Business at the University of Houston. It gives you a sense of empowerment, and that's why learning to say no comes in handy. She says one technique is the refusal strategy. A study in the Journal of Consumer Research by Professor Patrick and Heinrich found that saying I don't as opposed to I can't allowed participants to extract themselves from unwanted commitments. That sounds simple enough. Instead of saying I can't, you say I don't. While I can't sounds like excuses, like an excuse that's up for debate, I don't implies you've already established certain rules for yourself, suggesting conviction and stability, and since it's personal, it also maintains the social connections humans crave. It says, she remembers how, as a recent college graduate, she was short on her student loan payment because of the need for this social connection. She didn't say no to an overly friendly door-to-door magazine seller. She had a nice conversation with her, but then was out $30, and unfortunately, the magazines never came. She said, we actually used the pushy salesperson scenario, selling magazine subscriptions, Professor Patrick said. She and her colleagues asked some subjects to sell magazines and others to say no. When subjects said, I don't versus I can't, they were more effective in getting their point across, and the sellers were more willing to accept their refusal. That's an easy little tip. Say, I don't. There are a few other ways you can get more comfortable with saying no. First, practice being more aggressive when the stakes are low. For example, when a cashier asks you to sign for a store credit card and you don't want to, try saying, oh, I don't use store credit cards, instead of the passive, not today, but thank you, which implies your decision is up for debate. It's a lot easier to be assertive with a stranger selling you something than it is when, say, your pleading coworker asks for a ride to the airport. Get comfortable with the assertiveness when it's easy so that you'll be prepared when there's more pressure. I think that's an important point. That's what strategy is all about. You really are always preparing to make decisions, and you're putting plans in place. But when there is a field level decision or there's something that you need to make a decision on immediately, having the experience, having canned responses is really going to help you to make the best decision and use the proper wording to get you into or out of a specific situation. So always be prepared. It says, second, it's easier to say no when you know exactly how to say it. So come up with a few anchor phrases for different situations. No, I don't buy from solicitors if a door-to-door salesperson came to you. No, I don't go out during the week. This is if a coworker asks you to go out on a drinking binge on Monday night. And when you have these phrases ready, you don't have to waste time wavering or for an excuse, and you start to develop up a reflexive behavior of saying no. Still, sometimes we're afraid to say no because we fear we're missing out. We want to take on opportunities and adventures, so we say yes to everything instead. It's what Shonda Rhimes and Tina Fey told us to do, she says. But all of those yeses can lead to burnout. We live in a culture where it's expected that the person who is going to get ahead is the go-getter who says yes to everything that comes their way. But Dara Blaine, a career counselor and coach in Los Angeles, said, "It's when people learn to say no that she really sees their careers take off." It's when people learn to say no that she really sees their careers to take off. Says, "I wouldn't encourage someone who's struggling to say no to everything," Miss Blaine said, "but I would encourage them to say no to something just to change the story. The story being, I have said yes to everything, or I'm not going to make it." Still, some commitments and obligations are difficult to reject. You can't tell your boss, "I'm sorry I don't work past 5 p.m. But there are always ways to ease into the refusal. If your boss wants to pile on extra work, for example, you might suggest you're not doing the best choice for the task because your plate is already full and you don't want quality to sacrifice. I think the other important thing this article points out is that research from Columbia University found that our perceptions of our own assertiveness is often unreliable, and they prove this through mock negotiations. So the point there is that if you feel like you are being confrontational, there's a great chance that the other party does not see that you are being confrontational. So don't be afraid to try and say no. And if you do feel like you are being overly confrontational, practice and rehearse it. Videotape yourself saying it, because there's always body language that we give off, or the tone that we use can also impact how others are perceiving it. It says each person's mileage is going to vary, but if you feel overwhelmed, there's no small word that can remind you of how much control you have over your destiny. And that small word is no. For most of us, this means living a happier and less stressful life, which is easier for us to do if we're in the driver's seat, rather than waiting for these non-existent magazine subscriptions to arrive in the mail. I think this is an important way to look at it. Learning to say no when we want to really say yes. From my perspective, we want to start by doing it in little situations where there's not a lot of stress or there's not a lot of pressure. If you're in front of the cashier and they offer you a credit card or they want you to sign up for their program, say something that might get you out of a jam, like, "I don't use those," as opposed to, "Well, maybe next time." You're listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about why people can't say no and the power of saying no. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. You're listening to My Strategy. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Well, if you're just joining us, glad that you could be here. Today we're talking about learning to say no, talking about natural-born achievers and their tendency to say yes, which can get them overwhelmed. Learning to say no gives you back your time, control, self-confidence, and much more. Right before the break, we were talking about why you should say no more often. In this segment, I want to talk a little bit about the power of saying no, even though it is very hard to do. Would glad to take your phone calls. We'll take those later in the show. The number is 866-451-1451. That's 866-451-1451. Or send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. And if you send in an email saying hi or giving us a tip or a trick, you'll be entered into the weekly giveaway. Well, why so many people can't just say no? One little word, or two little letters, one syllable, and lots of drama. I have an article here by Hank Davis. He says, there are some people who would rather cross burning sand than utter the sound no. Even for people who can say no, it doesn't always come easily. He says our culture has given us memes and rituals that helps us avoid having to utter that dreaded word. We've invented ways of suggesting that we might want to decline without having to look anyone in the eye and say no. If you stand back and watch it happen, you'll be amazed at the number of socially acceptable, watered-down alternatives there are for that simple, one-syllable word. A friend of his calls it noophobia. It's as if we think speaking those two letters is going to kill. He says, I'm in a men's group, and about 2 years ago, they had some difficulty keeping their membership numbers at a satisfactory level. So they asked a friend who works at a social service agency whether she could recommend somebody, and she had a colleague who she thought would be good. So they invited him. We came to the sample meeting, and the guys liked him very well. We invited him to join us, but after 2 weeks, there was no reply. So she asked him a second time, this time via phone message. Again, no response. The third time was sent by email. Again, nothing. They asked the friend if she could talk to him at work and see what was going on. To her credit, she said no. She told me, he's already answered you. It's a passive no. Don't you remember what you taught me several years ago? Suddenly I remembered she'd come to me in a state of confusion. She had asked a friend for a favor, but the woman didn't say yes and wouldn't say no, despite repeated overtures. This woman just left my friend hanging. Why is that? She asked me in frustration, why won't she give me an answer? At the time, I assumed the explanation was geographical. I suggested to my friend she'd already given you a reply. Maybe it's a Canadian no. The friend looked at her puzzled. What is a Canadian no? She asked. And so I explained that Canadians don't like to say no. That doesn't make them more like the Americans to say yes. It just means that they're far less likely to look you in the eye and say no. It doesn't seem to matter whether you're face-to-face, talking to them on the phone, texting, or emailing them. They are far more comfortable having your request die of old age than actually refusing it. They'll leave it for you to figure out. Whatever it was you wanted just ain't going to happen. He's learned by saying, I've since learned I was wrong, in the sense that Americans share this tiny timidity as well. I have taken to calling it a passive no rather than limiting it to all Canadians. I guess the question is here, when you do ask somebody for something, are they upfront and forward with you about their responses, or are they passive and timid and do not give you a response? Not giving somebody a response isn't good communication, and it can hurt relationships. So I think it's important when you are thinking about someone who's asked you to do something, or you are being asked to do something, be timely in the response. Got another article here by Paula Rizzo. It says, as entrepreneurs, we hear no on a regular basis. It's almost like it's part of the job description. Try to counteract some of that negativity. We say yes, and we say it a lot. She says when she first started out as an entrepreneur, she ran into several issues several times, and she wanted to get involved in everything and show her willingness to learn. But at some point, she learned she had to put her foot down. So as she went through coming up with these various instances, she started to document what worked for her. She said, learn how to say no. Be quick. Tell the person you can't do it and politely decline right away. That way you don't hold up someone else's plans. Be honest. Explain that you have other commitments and can't make it. Suggest an alternative. Name another person who might be able to take your place. Ask for a rain check. Sometimes we really do want to do something, but it's just not a good time. Make a plan for the future to show good faith. It's a good idea to have criteria for what to say yes to and what you want to say no to. And this comes back to strategic planning. So think about, do I truly want to do this? What do I gain out of doing this task or attending this function? What has this person done for me lately? What else will I do with my time if I don't do this? The saying no typically feels awkward and definitely takes practice. Once you've overcome your fear of saying no, you'll realize how easy it is. Try not to substitute ways to be agreeable. Instead, say no to requests that do not work for you or meet your needs. Why do we say no? There's a lot of reasons. Time to do whatever you want. Power to be in control of your life. More self-confidence. Safety from overextending yourself. Opportunities you didn't even know were out there are now going to be more available to you. So I think there's a lot of different ways we can think about no in our lives, and there's a lot of different people who are going to come to us and ask us, but it's important to know that there is power in saying no. And when we start to determine what we are trying to accomplish in life and, think about our strategies and our visions and our goals, and we have a clear definition of that, and we have a clear definition of what our values are, we have a clear definition of who we want to be as a person. When people come up to us with questions and ask for us to do, we're going to be in a much better position to say no. You're listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, if you're still having trouble saying no, you're going to want to try these tips. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio, and you're listening to My Strategy. Well, if you're just joining us, very happy that you could join us today. Our episodes are live and on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Today we're talking about learning to say no. This episode, we're talking about how natural-born achievers and their tendency to say yes can get them overwhelmed. Learning to say no gives you back time, control, self-confidence, and much more. We'd love to get your thoughts. You can give us a call on our studio lines at 866-451-1451. Take those calls a little later in the show. Or send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. Right before the break, we were talking about why people can't say no and the power of saying no. The segment I want to transition, we want to talk about still having trouble saying no, and say this instead. I've got an article here by Megan Bruneo. She says for many years she lived in a constant state of overwhelmed exhaustion, resentment, and guilt. Why? Because she couldn't say no. And so she was always overbooked, stressed. She felt resentful and frustrated. But in reality, she kept herself stuck in the cycle by saying yes to everyone and everything. When she got fed up with it all, she would bail, leaving friends upset and contaminating her relief with guilt over being a flake. That's interesting. She said yes so often, then couldn't handle it, and now she seems flaky. She says, can you relate? So many of us, and she says in particular women, have a hard time saying no. They're socialized to help, to nurture, to put others first, to never turn down opportunities or disappoint. And so they take on work that they don't need to take on. They attend events they don't want to attend. They go on dates when they'd much rather be doing laundry or catching up on emails or reading. They have a drink when they'd prefer to stay sober. They buy things they don't want to buy or donate to causes they don't want to donate to. Why do we do this? She says it's because we don't want to let people down. But this isn't a serving way of living. Not only do we experience all the negative consequences mentioned, we rarely get to experience the life we want to, and our needs are always put aside to make room for someone else. And how frustrating can that be if you are in a situation where you are being asked to do something and you really don't want to do it? And so you say yes, and then somebody else comes to you and says, I need this to be done. And so you say yes. A never-ending amount of yeses will overwhelm you. And when you start to think about a strategy and a plan, which is what we work on every week in personal development, if you're constantly saying yes, you are changing your strategic plan by focusing on different actions than you had originally intended on focusing on. And we know that if you don't focus on the actions that are going to help you get to your goal, you will not reach your goal. She says, here are some helpful beliefs that lead to always saying yes. Belief, never turn down an opportunity. The truth, there are endless opportunities. And if you took them all, you'd live in a state of constant stress. Consider saying no to the opportunity being a way of saying yes to yourself. So don't say no to the opportunity. Say yes to yourself. Belief. Always put others first. Being selfish is such a bad thing. The truth is, we need to be selfish. No one else is living our lives for us. Cliche as it is, you can't pour from an empty cup. The relationship is which you're giving all of yourself will improve drastically if you set boundaries and encourage when you want to. Now, that all said, being selfish doesn't give you a license to be an a-hole, but I'm going to assume that if you're not a pleaser, learning how to put yourself first isn't going to drive you into a other hole territory. Okay, the next belief. Always follow through on what you've committed to. Truth. Learning how to say no will actually drastically decrease how often you flake because you won't commit to things you ultimately bail on. However, there will always be time when you need to cancel plans in order to take care of yourself, which is okay. Do it respectfully. Belief. If you can, you should. How many times are there things that I can do and someone says, I know you can do this, John, so will you help me? You've been in that position? Said the truth, just because you can help doesn't mean you should. If you feel equipped to help emotionally and energetically, and doing so alleviates the pain of seeing someone else in need, then do. But if you're feeling burnout, pressured, or guilted into helping, chances are you need to take that time to look after you. What other underlying beliefs inform your yes habit? Can you poke holes in those beliefs too? I think that's an important point she brings up. We're socialized to say yes. If you can do something, then why wouldn't you do it? Problem is that we are going to always be asked for things that we can do. We're always going to be, we're always going to feel potentially guilty or pressured into making certain decisions or helping someone when we don't really want to. So she gives us some tips to think about this. She says, if you are asked, say, I gave it some thought and now it's not a great time for me to take that on right now. Thanks for thinking of me. Or, I sat on it for a couple of hours. Knowing my schedule, I'm going to decline at this time. Or, I thought about it and I would love to, said, and you would engage in that task and role. Now give yourself permission to say no and start creating a more peaceful existence. That's from Megan Bruneau. How many times do you have trouble saying no, and why? And this is interesting because she goes into something that has me interested in this particular subject. It's the belief system. There are certain beliefs out there, and there are certain people who ask and you would never say no to. If your mother asked for something, you might never say no. But if it's somebody you know or a coworker, there are certain times when you need to set boundaries, especially if you feel like they're going to start to take advantage of you. That's where you need to go back and look at the relationship and really evaluate who it's coming from, why they're asking you to do it, and in having a clear understanding as to why they're doing it, that can help put you in a better position to make a clear decision on whether or not to engage in an activity. But I think it comes down to really having all of these tips on hand. You're listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about words that you can use to say no to anyone. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. This week, we're talking about learning to say no, where natural-born achievers and their tendency to say yes can get them overwhelmed. Learning to say no gives you back time, control, self-confidence, and much more. There's still time to get your entry in for the weekly giveaway. Send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. Right before the break, we were talking about saying no, talking about belief systems. In this segment, I want to talk a little bit about a systematic approach, your strategy. So here we have a systematic approach where we have 5 steps that we use. It's awareness, assess and analyze, strategize and plan, implement your plan, and support and evaluate your plan. And those are things that we think about on a regular basis as we're building our own personal development strategy or any strategy from that perspective. So in this segment, I want to talk about something that caught my eye. And, we want to have some canned responses that we can use when people come to us. So I've got this article here by Zara Campbell, and it says 49 ways to say no to anyone when you don't want to be a jerk. She goes through and talks in the beginning of the article about a lot of what we've talked about earlier in the show. Her first tip is use the word. Use the word no. Don't use not at this time, or I don't think so, or I'm not sure, or maybe next time. Use the word no. Another one is, her second one is, or a firm but polite alternative. I appreciate your time, but no thanks. Thanks for thinking of me, but I have too much on my plate right now. And that's a good one to use for the boss that asks you to take on more work. No thanks, not today, but thanks, not for me. Another one she says is, don't Constanza it. This goes for family and friends, even your boss. You don't have an elaborately fabricated ruse. Just say what you want. If you don't want to go to an event because you've had a rough week and would rather sit in bed watching Netflix, then say so. Don't invent an ailing grandmother story because you'll think it makes your response more plausible. Number 4 is don't go on and on. I love this one. In many cases, you ask someone to do something and it takes a few days to get a response back, or they'll go on and on for 10 minutes trying not to hurt your feelings. Just say no and move on. Don't be afraid to say it twice. Some people are very persistent and they do ask us things and they might come back and ask us again, but it's okay to say no twice. Number 6, if need be, use because. It says research has shown that using the word because makes people agree with you, even if the reason you give them is absolutely absurd. Smile and shake your head. It says use this if you're walking away from somebody handing out a flyer at the mall. Number 8 is be assertive. Helps to imagine that the person in control of the situation. Make eye contact and speak clearly. Don't mumble your no. It's extremely helpful, especially if you're being taken advantage of. And that can be hard to do. If you're in a situation where you're being taken advantage of, that's where you really are going to want to have some potentially professional help so that you can work through some of those issues and then become assertive. Don't take freebies. We're hardwired to want to reciprocate when someone gives us something. So if you take that cheese sample at the supermarket and the nice lady starts convincing you to buy it, you're far more likely to say yes than if you hadn't accepted the sample in the first place. So no freebies. Remind yourself of the opportunity cost. This is a good one. What if you lose time by giving in? Time, money, health. There's nothing that comes for free. Read up on the tricks used by con artists. It makes you realize how easily even the smartest among us can get fooled into saying yes. Don't be conned. Number 13 is trust your gut. 14, provide an alternative. Pass the buck. If you want to say no to something that you know someone else might want to say yes to, feel free to pass on that information. That's happened to me a few times. People have been asked to do something and they don't want to do it, so my name gets suggested. Next thing you know, I'm the person who has to say no. That's okay. Negotiate. If you're willing to meet halfway, this is the time to negotiate. If you're willing to accommodate the request without saying it outright, no. Don't delay. There's a point in making someone else wait for an answer. If you know that your answer will be no, don't procrastinate. Just say, I'll think about it if you won't. Go ahead and change your mind. Just because you said once doesn't mean you're stuck with saying yes. That sounds good. Say it often. The more you practice, the better you're going to become. The what a shame, while saying sorry I can't, will certainly soften your message and make it more polite. It will dilute it. Try using another term as opposed to I can't. Avoid serial askers. A white lie will never hurt. Not now. It's not you, it's me. Empathize. You don't always have to be nice. Number 30 is air your discomfort. I wish I could. Thanks, but no thanks. 33 is use body language. 35 is I'm flattered, but no thank you. 36, I really shouldn't. 37 is heck no. 38, I said no. It's not the best. I know this isn't the answer you were hoping for, but no. Last time was great, but no. Let me know if you want me to reshuffle priorities. That's a good one to use with bosses or someone who's asking you to do more. I'm good, I'm happy, I'm all set. There's a lot of different things we can use, a lot of different phrases we can use. And I think the more we practice them and start to think about which ones we're going to use in our bag, it's going to give us the better opportunity. So when someone does ask us, we can say no. You're listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about putting your plan in place. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. You're listening to My Strategy. Well, very happy to have you here today. Today we've been talking about learning to say no. In this episode, we talk about natural-born achievers and their tendency to say yes, which can get them overwhelmed. Learning to say no gives you back time, control, self-confidence, and much more. And in case you missed this broadcast, you can go back and find us on iHeartRadio, Apple, iTunes. And if you'd like to have something covered in the show, send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com or give us a call at 844-MY-STRATEGY. So learning to say no. We talked a little bit about the signs that you're being taken advantage of, which is something that natural-born achievers run into. Do you ever feel like you are undervalued, that your boss takes all the credit, that you're constantly being asked for something? You're doing it, but you're not receiving the accolades. There's a lot of people out there who are not overachievers, who are not hard workers, and they're going to get ahead by using your hard work to help them do that. It's important to look for those signs to see if you are being taken advantage of. Because at the end of the day, if you don't address that situation early and with some conviction, they can continue to take advantage of you, which will impact your self-esteem. And then talked a little bit about why you should say no more often. In fact, we're a very social animal. We want to please. We want to be in the company of others. We learned about a strategy by saying, I don't, instead of using I can't. So if you're at your house and a solicitor knocks on the door and said, would you like to buy this? You can say, I don't buy from solicitors. If you're in the checkout line at a grocery store and they say, would you like to get our store credit card? You say, I don't use store credit cards. So using don't in your vocabulary can help, and don't is something that is perceived more strongly than I can't. We talked about why people can't say no and the power. We know saying no is hard to do, although we hear no from others all the time. Sometimes we have a hard time saying no to others, but there is a lot of power in doing it. If you are having trouble saying no, say no in a situation where there's relatively low risk. Start with the person at the grocery store. Start with a solicitor. Start with something small. And by building up on that, you can start to gain practice with using no. And when bigger situations come up, you can start to use it then. If you're still having trouble saying no, you can identify this. If you're overbooked, stressed, there might be good opportunities. You should put others first. If you can, you should. Well, there's lots of opportunities out there, but there's always going to be another opportunity. And I think it comes down to figuring out what are our goals and our objectives and what are we trying to accomplish. And once we've got a good handle on that, we'll know when an opportunity is a good opportunity, and we'll know when to push back on an opportunity that somebody presents us that is not in our strategic plan. We then talked about ways to say no to anyone. Use the word no, and don't be afraid to use it. Be firm but polite. Look them in the eye. Be assertive. Don't delay. Don't go on and on and on when you need to say no. And by having some of these canned phrases in your vocabulary, that's going to put you in a position of strength next time somebody comes to say no. But I think all this comes down to breaking the habits, being aware of the patterns that you are in, really trying to consciously prioritize and commit to your goals or intentions, and clarity. The more you work on your situation, in this case, figuring out when to say no, the better you're going to get at it. And hopefully that will help you better prioritize your time. You've been listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.